At our anniversary dinner, my wife toasted, "New rules for my husband." Her friends laughed, until I handed her the divorce papers. I am a 32-year-old man. I slid the envelope onto the white tablecloth while the last cheers were still fading and the sparklers were burning out over a plate that said "Congratulations" in chocolate. My wife had just lifted a glass and announced new rules for her husband. Her friends clapped. Someone filmed. The restaurant staff smiled, the kind of smile people wear when they are paid to ignore discomfort. I placed the envelope beside her plate, between the phone she had turned face down and the napkin she had folded like a performance. I did not speak. I let the weight of paper carry what my voice refused to carry anymore. The end looked sudden to the people at that table. It was not. It grew the way hairline cracks grow across glass, quietly, steadily, ignored until they catch the light. When we married, she loved the way I cared about the small things. She said order felt like safety. She said my lists calmed her. I labeled jars and set reminders. I thought I was building a home. She thought she had found a man who would carry the invisible load without keeping score. The shift happened slowly. Appreciation turned into expectation. Then expectation turned into complaint. By year 3, the same lists that once looked like devotion were mocked as rigidity. She said life needed spontaneity. I agreed, but I wanted respect to be the ground under it. Her world lived online. She curated moments. She tracked approval like an accountant. She said it was harmless. She said it was a hobby that might become a brand. She said I should be supportive because modern life needed visibility. I took photos and held lights. I wrote captions when she asked for punchier words. I learned angles and filters I never wanted to know. When I asked for nights with our phones away, she said silence was nice but engagement dropped if she disappeared. She said marriage should adapt. I accepted adaptation, but I watched our private world shrink until it fit inside other people's screens. The first fracture I could not ignore arrived at a friend's birthday. She built a game where people shared confessions. She announced that couples who trusted each other should play. Then she read my private texts aloud into a microphone because she said transparency was love. People laughed at lines pulled out of context. She said I was overreacting when I went quiet. She said I should loosen up because reality needed humor. I told her that trust without privacy is performance. She called that sentence dramatic and said I was turning into an old man at 30. After that, boundaries became negotiable only when they were hers. She stayed out late with colleagues and called it networking. She hugged her past in photos and called it maturity. She turned jokes about husbands into content and called it empowerment. I swallowed irritation because I did not want to be the stereotype who forbids. I asked for one thing, that she keep our marriage off the stage when the material was humiliation. She promised to be careful and then used the next story as an example of how tough love keeps men in line. People sent laughing emojis. I felt my chest get tight and my jaw ache from the habit of politeness. There were good days. She could be tender, practical, generous. She bought my favorite coffee beans without reminders. She placed a hand on my shoulder when I worked late and told me to rest. She curled up and told me she felt safe with me. I held those days like receipts. I used them to argue against the voice that said respect was being replaced by a version of me built for views. The worst fights never needed raised voices. They came as small rules she announced after other people clapped. I could not post photos without clearing them. I had to wear what photographed well when we were in public. I had to learn lines before her collaborations so I would not embarrass her. She said successful couples operate like teams. She said teams require a captain. I was not the captain. The week before our anniversary, she pitched a toast idea. She said anniversaries needed content that sparkled. She said people loved lists and ultimatums when they were packaged as jokes. She said she would present new rules for her husband to stay interesting. I told her it felt mean. She said I was sensitive and that sensitive men are lucky to have patient wives. I reminded her that I had swallowed a dozen pebbles already and felt the weight in my stomach every night. She said I was dramatic again and told me the restaurant had great lighting. I printed the papers after that conversation. I did it quietly, without the soundtrack of anger. I placed them in an envelope that looked like a card. I scheduled the notary and lined up the practical steps because practicality is the only anchor when you cut a rope you have been pulling for years. I did not plan to make a scene. I planned to end a scene that would otherwise never end. The anniversary dinner started with calm. She arrived in a dress chosen for the camera. She recorded the menu. She asked me to move my glass for a shot of the table. I moved it. We ate small bites with decorative sauces. She told me a brand had reached out. I congratulated her. I told her I wanted a quiet walk after dessert. She nodded in a way that meant maybe. When the plates cleared, she stood. She clicked her glass with a spoon to get attention. She smiled the smile that always worked on strangers. She said she was grateful for a husband who understood a modern marriage. She said she had prepared a few new rules to keep me sharp. Her friends leaned in with the delight of bystanders waiting for a playful roast. She listed rules that sounded like jokes until they landed like orders. She said I should remember to ask for permission before making decisions that affected her brand. She said I should accept that my face belonged to her audience when she needed a prop. She said I should be more fun and less particular. She said I should stop acting like a security guard around her freedom. The table laughed. Phones recorded. The staff hovered, unsure whether they were watching entertainment or erosion. I felt something in me cool the way metal cools after heat. Calm took over. I waited until the last chuckle. I stood only enough to reach. I placed the envelope on the table within her frame. I did not push it hard. I did not say a line I would regret later. I sat down and folded my hands. The room shifted. Laughter thinned. She looked at the envelope with confusion, then suspicion, then anger. She asked, in a tone that aimed to be light, whether this was a love letter. I told her no. I told her it was the only boundary that still worked when jokes became rules. Her friends stared. Someone lowered a phone. She opened the envelope and saw my signature. She read the plain words that end a promise. She did not cry. She closed the folder, set it down, and stared at me like she was waiting for a punchline. I kept my face steady and my voice low. I said I loved her and I was done being material. I said respect is not a performance metric. I said I would not live inside a brand. Her friends started talking at once. One said I was fragile. Another said I should handle things in private. A third said marriage is compromise and that I should learn. I let their words pass like wind. My wife said we could discuss terms later and that I had embarrassed her in front of people who mattered. I said the people who mattered were in this marriage, and there were only two. She told me I had proved her point about security guards. I stood, placed my card on the bill, and left the table with a thank you to the staff that sounded like a farewell to a chapter. In the cab home, I expected regret to sprint up behind me. It did not. Relief did not sprint either. A slower emotion settled in, a plain, tired truth. I had spent years trying to keep a boat steady while someone else drilled small holes in the hull and called it expression. I arrived at the apartment and saw the ring dish by the sink, the soft throw over the couch, the framed photos of perfect weekends. I washed my face. I laid out a spare blanket on the sofa. I sent one message to my brother asking him to help me move some boxes soon. Then I slept the way exhausted people sleep, not well, not badly, just deeply enough to wake up and keep going. Morning brought the first wave. She sent a long message that said I was impulsive. She said couples fight and fix. She reminded me of trips and memories. She said the toast was humor and the rules were pretend. She said content pays bills. She said marriage should evolve with the times. I read it twice. I replied with a short note that said I wanted a marriage, not a stage. I told her I would be at the apartment at 4 to pack a few essentials and sleep elsewhere. I told her we could handle the rest with a mediator. She replied with a stream of accusations and 2 sentences of pleading. I put my phone face down and went to work. At lunch, I sat on a bench and thought about the first year. She had been softer. I had been less rigid. We had cooked cheap meals and laughed at broken corks. We had taken turns surprising each other with small kindness. I wondered when the line had shifted from us to you and me. I could not find the exact day. It is never a day. It is a slope. By evening, the slope was crowded. Her mother called and said I was overreacting. She said strong women scare weak men. She said I should be proud that my wife was admired. I told her admiration is not the same as respect. She told me I would regret tanking a marriage over pride. I said I was saving myself from a slower demolition. She hung up with the force of a slammed door without hinges. At 4, I unlocked the door to a silent apartment. The vase on the table held flowers from the restaurant. Their stems were already browning. I packed a suitcase with quiet hands. I took my clothes, my notebooks, 3 books, my grandfather's watch, and the photo of my parents at a kitchen table smiling at each other like nobody else was in the room. I left the ring in its dish. I cleaned the sink because habit wins even at the end. I stood in the doorway and looked once more at a home that had become a set. Then I closed the door behind me and felt the first clean edge in months. I texted my father that I had done it. He replied with a sentence that had the weight of a hand on a shoulder. He told me to keep my voice steady and my paperwork clean. He said leaving well is harder than leaving loudly. I promised myself I would try to do it well. I slept at my brother's place on a pull-out couch that tried to fold at the corners. He made space in his fridge without commentary. He offered tea and silence. I took both. In the morning, I booked an appointment with a mediator. I sent the details through a calm message. I turned my phone over and let the hours pass without checking. I went to the gym and ran until my lungs reminded me I was still inside a body with limits. When I stopped, I felt that tired truth again. It was not joy. It was not grief. It was a flat surface finally cleared of confetti. I expected the performance of remorse to arrive quickly. It did not. What arrived was an invitation to a live stream she titled Lessons from a Modern Marriage. I did not watch. A friend later said she framed it as growing pains and strength. She said she used the phrase holding men accountable. I turned off my phone and wrote 4 words on a torn envelope: loyalty, peace, privacy, home. I put the envelope in my wallet like a compass. That night, a message came that was not public. She wrote that she wanted to meet face to face and talk without an audience. She said she would not record. She said she promised. I agreed to meet the next afternoon at a small cafe that serves bitter coffee and no Wi-Fi. I arrived early. I placed the mediator's card on the table beside my glass. I looked out the window at people crossing the street in the soft light that makes everything look kinder than it is. I waited. She arrived in oversized sunglasses and a sweatshirt that tried to signal humility. She sat without theatrics. She said she had not slept. She said the word betrayal without crying. She said I had turned a private conflict into a public humiliation. I told her the humiliation began when private promises became public material. I kept my voice level because anger was a luxury I did not want to buy. She said she never cheated. I told her I believed that and still felt pushed to the edge of a life I did not choose. She said I could have spoken to her first. I told her I had, again and again, quietly and plainly. She stared at the table and picked at a napkin until it shredded. She asked what I needed to call this a rough patch. I told her I needed our marriage to stop being a stage. I told her I needed boundaries respected without debate. I told her I needed an apology that was not built for applause. I told her I needed a future plan that did not rely on public approval. She asked if I would give up control of the calendar and the labels. I told her I already had tried and could try again in a home where dignity was the rule. She asked if I wanted her off every platform. I told her I wanted her to choose being a wife over being content. She said that sounded like a cage. I said that sounded like a door with a lock we both controlled. She asked if I could wait. I said I had waited. She asked if the papers were final in my heart. I told her the papers were the only thing that had felt honest in months. We drank bitter coffee. We sat in the kind of silence that either builds a bridge or confirms a shoreline. She finally said she would meet the mediator. I nodded. We left without touching. The mediator's office was neutral and clean. He used simple language and steady pauses. He asked if we wanted the short process or the long one. I said short. She asked what the long one bought. He said stories. He said some couples use the process as a way to replay grievances until exhaustion does the work. He said short is kindness if the decision is clear. She stared at the wall and chose short. We divided our life. We listed accounts, furniture, responsibilities. It is always small things that sting. She wanted the framed prints that hung over our bed. I said she could take them. I asked for the kitchen table. She nodded without looking up. We arranged dates for moving and signatures. We chose a plan for the lease. We promised to keep mutual friends out of courtrooms of opinion. She agreed, then broke that promise a week later when she posted a caption about learning to leave men who feared a strong woman. I wrote and deleted 3 responses. I chose the only sentence that still matched my list. I wrote nothing. Her friends sent messages that mixed concern with performance. One asked if I was okay and then suggested a podcast interview about quiet men and noisy marriages. I declined. Another suggested that we reconnect for the audience as a lesson in forgiveness. I said forgiveness is not theater. I muted threads and removed myself from groups where my name became a topic. I chose small tasks, boxing books, updating addresses, opening the window to change the air. My father visited and brought tools. We fixed a cabinet door in my new place that sagged. He said men underestimate the relief of doors that close properly. He said I had done the right thing, not because endings are brave but because clarity is. He told me to take evening walks, drink water, keep the list of values close. We ate simple food and watched the kind of game you watch with half an eye. He left quietly. The apartment felt bare and kind in the way empty rooms can feel like a clean page. The first weekend alone was the worst. Mornings are honest. They offer you yourself without distraction. I made coffee and sat at the table I fought to keep. Sunlight moved across the wood. The quiet was not friendly yet. I resisted the urge to scroll. I wrote 3 lines in a notebook, one feeling, one thing I did well, one thing I would do tomorrow. The first day, the feeling was grief, the thing done well was leaving the phone in another room, and the tomorrow task was to buy a plant. I kept that ritual. It made the days stack in a way that felt like construction, not waiting. People asked whether I missed her. I did. I missed the version of us that was not surrounded by an audience. I missed the woman who once fell asleep on my shoulder during a thunderstorm and said safety tastes like mint tea and clean sheets. Missing does not mean you return to a burning room. It means you stand outside in the rain, remember warmth, and still decline to walk back in. She tried once more in a private message. She wrote that she was willing to delete some videos and set new boundaries. She wrote that she had overcorrected and turned marriage into a brand because fear of invisibility is strong. She wrote that she wanted children someday and did not want to model performative love for them. I read it slowly. I asked myself the only question that mattered: did I believe her words would become actions when the applause faded? The answer did not come from anger, it came from a quiet, painful honesty. I did not. I wished her healing. I held my line. We moved our boxes on a Tuesday. She took the prints, the coffee machine, a chair that creaked, 3 candles she had never lit, and the feeling that she had lost control of her own narrative. I took the table, my books, 2 mugs with chipped rims that still felt right in the hand, and a small blue bowl where I now drop my keys. The superintendent nodded at me the way building staff nod at men who have just become one again. I slept that night with the window open and my phone off. I woke at dawn and felt a thin stripe of peace. It was not everything. It was a start. Work became a steady rope. Routine is underrated. I arrived early, did the things that generate calm, left on time, and let my evenings be small. I walked to a park and watched old men play chess without talking. I cooked meals that made sense for one person. I called my mother and let her be worried without offering her a stage either. I learned the names of my neighbor's dogs. I lifted heavier because heaviness was now a choice under my hands. She went on with her life. I heard about brand deals and guest spots through people who still followed her. I learned to let those updates slide past. I unfollowed without ceremony. I deleted shared albums. I kept 2 photos as a private archive of how real can be before it turns performative, one of us on a cheap balcony eating ice pops under a noisy AC unit, and one of our feet in mismatched socks under a blanket during the winter the radiator knocked like a neighbor. The legal finalization arrived in my inbox one afternoon. It was short, cold, and absolute. I read it, printed it, filed it, and walked to a bakery. I bought 1 slice of cake, took it home, and ate it with black coffee. I did not toast. I did not post. I sat at the table, chewed slowly, and let my shoulders drop into the fact of it. I whispered a small prayer of thanks for clarity and asked for the patience to keep choosing peace when loneliness tried to bargain. Weeks later, I met someone at a hardware store while trying to decide between 2 types of wall anchors. She offered advice because she had hung heavy shelves in old plaster. Her tone was practical, not performative. We spoke about ugly paint and sturdy things. She laughed with her mouth closed like someone who was used to keeping the good parts for the people in the room. I did not turn the moment into a lesson or a future. I bought the anchors and went home and hung a shelf that did not sag. That felt like enough. My ex sent one last message months after everything signed. She wrote that she had watched a couple sitting at a cafe, heads bent toward each other, phones away. She wrote that she had felt a sharp ache and then a long sigh. She wrote that she hoped I had found what I wanted. I replied that I had found a quieter house and a list that keeps me steady. I wished her kindness. She sent a simple thanks. We left it there. On the anniversary of the dinner, I cooked at home. No sparklers. No speech. I poured a glass of water that looked like clarity. I sat at the same table and wrote my 3 lines. The first was that I felt peaceful and a little sad at the same time, which I accepted as human. The second was that I had fixed a leaky faucet without calling anyone. The third was that tomorrow I would visit my parents and help my father replace a door hinge that had squeaked for years. After dinner, I took a slow walk. A couple took photos under a streetlight. I wished them a private life. I do not pretend to be noble. I hung on too long. I excused meanness because it wore glitter. I confused tolerance with love and turned the other cheek until I ran out of cheeks. The divorce papers on the table looked cruel to some people. Maybe they were. They were also the first honest sentence spoken in a room that survived on performance. I do not know what story she tells now. I only know the one I tell myself: a marriage can break without infidelity if disrespect lives rent-free long enough. Leaving is not a victory. It is the end of a long argument between your dignity and your fear. I keep the envelope in a drawer. It is empty now. I reach for it when doubt tries to rewrite history with softer light. I tap it with my knuckles and remind myself that love is not supposed to humiliate. I remind myself that new rules do not belong in toasts, they belong in quiet conversations where nobody is filming. I remind myself that a home is not a set, a husband is not a prop, and a life is not a brand. The shelf I hung holds 4 things: the chipped mugs, a plant that somehow survived a winter of neglect, the photo of my parents at their table, and a small wooden box of old letters that prove I once wrote softer words. I plan to write softer words again when they have room to live. I will not announce rules in public. I will not hand papers on a birthday. I will choose in daylight, with the same steady quiet I used when I walked away. When I turn off the lights at night, the apartment breathes like a chest that has stopped bracing. I lie down and listen. The city is still loud, but the room is not. My phone sleeps outside the bedroom. My list sits on the nightstand: loyalty, peace, privacy, home. I read it, not as a spell but as a promise to myself. Then I close my eyes and sleep the way people sleep who have learned that silence can be a companion, not a void. And in the morning, I wake to a small square of light on the table and the clean, ordinary fact that no one is waiting for me to perform.
Follow me for more stories.